I'm standing right now at Elvis Presley's tomb in Graceland's quiet meditation garden, and I need you to look at this marble a little closer, because there's something deeply wrong here, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. This isn't a ghost story or some wild conspiracy theory. It's about who's missing from his final resting place and why. Tonight, I'm making an announcement about this tomb that no Graceland tour will ever tell you. To understand it, we have to go back to the one woman Elvis called his soulmate, and who's been erased from this spot forever. This isn't tabloid gossip, and it's not some clickbait rumor about Elvis's ghost. What you're about to hear is a true Hollywood love story that's been buried under stone and silence for decades. The marble you just saw isn't just a grave marker. It's the final line of a carefully edited script. And once you understand what's been left out of that script, it changes the way you see everything at Graceland. In this video, we're going to connect three things most people never think about together. Elvis Presley's tomb at Graceland, the way it's presented to millions of visitors every year, and the emotional weight of a relationship that almost never makes it onto the official tour. You've seen the flowers, the eternal flame, the family names carved in stone, but you've probably never stopped to ask whose story is being told there, and whose isn't. To really understand what's wrong with this quiet little garden, we have to step back into the blinding lights of Hollywood and talk about Elvis's secret, explosive romance with Ann-Margret. This wasn't a casual fling or a studio publicity stunt. It was intense, complicated, and powerful enough that it continued to echo through both of their lives long after the camera stopped rolling. And yet, when you stand at his final resting place, that entire chapter of his heart has been wiped completely clean. I'm not asking you to just take my word for it. We're going to walk through the memories Ann-Margret shared in her own book, the painful details Priscilla revealed in hers, eyewitness accounts from Elvis's funeral, and the stories fans have quietly passed down for years. I'll keep it simple. I'll keep it human. And if you stay with me to the very end, only then will the disturbing truth about this tomb fully make sense. Graceland isn't just a house, it's a pilgrimage. Every year, millions of people travel from all over the world just to walk these paths, shuffle past the gates, and eventually stand right here in the meditation garden. You see flowers carefully arranged along the stone, candles flickering in the early morning light, fan letters tucked gently against the base of the tomb. There are always a few people standing in silence, heads bowed, sunglasses hiding quiet tears, as if they're visiting not just a singer, but someone they personally knew. The garden itself is peaceful in a way that almost feels staged, like a movie set frozen on the perfect final scene. The air is still, the fountains softly murmur in the background, and the tombs are laid out in a neat symmetrical line. On Elvis's stone, the words carve out a very specific version of who he was: the devoted son, the loving father, the larger-than-life American icon. It's beautiful, it's respectful, and it's very, very controlled. Nothing here is an accident. But here's the thing most people don't think about. When a person becomes a legend, who decides which parts of their heart actually make it onto the stone? Is it the family, the estate, the publicists who spent years polishing his image? Or is it a committee somewhere, quietly choosing which pieces of his real life are acceptable to be carved into marble while the rest gets quietly swept into the shadows? If you stand here long enough and really look at this tomb, it starts to feel less like a neutral memorial and more like an edited script. Every line engraved, every title used, every phrase chosen, it all works together to tell you a very particular story about Elvis Presley. But just like any carefully edited story, what's left out is just as important as what's left in. And once you start noticing those blank spaces, the silence around certain parts of his life becomes almost deafening. That's where things get uncomfortable, because buried underneath all this polished stone and carefully chosen words is a missing chapter that changes how this place feels once you know it exists. On the surface, this garden looks complete, like the final page of a book neatly closed. But it isn't. There's something, or rather, someone, who doesn't appear anywhere here. And that quiet omission is what makes this tomb feel so wrong once the full story finally comes to light. To really understand why this quiet stone in Graceland feels so unsettling, We have to leave the garden for a moment and jump back to 1963, straight into the blinding neon lights of Viva Las Vegas. Picture it. Two of the biggest stars on the planet, Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret, thrown together on a film set that was already humming with energy. The second the cameras rolled, something electric happened. Their on-screen chemistry wasn't subtle or staged, it crackled. Audiences didn't have to be told they had a connection. You could feel it in every glance, every dance number, every moment they shared on screen. It was the kind of chemistry you can't fake, and everyone watching, cast, crew, and later millions of fans, could see it. But what really matters isn't just what the cameras caught, it's what happened when they stopped rolling. Ann-Margret later described a current between them, something that ran underneath every conversation, every joke, every shared silence. It wasn't just attraction, it was like a magnet they couldn't turn off. She talked about how intense it felt, how undeniable. Two people, both at the top of their careers, both surrounded by noise and chaos, suddenly finding a connection that felt strangely private and deeply personal. Even with an entire film crew watching from the sidelines, they bonded over the things that made them feel most alive. Music, of course, both of them performers to the core, but also speed and risk and a sense of wild fun. Motorcycles, cars, late-night laughter, a shared taste for mischief that made them feel like co-conspirators rather than just co-stars. They didn't just play characters who clicked. Off-camera, they mirrored each other in a way that made them feel understood. For Elvis, who was often isolated by fame, that kind of reflection was rare. For Ann-Margret, it felt like she'd met someone who spoke the same emotional language, and Elvis didn't keep her at a distance the way he did with most people. He brought Ann-Margret into his inner circle, the tight-knit group of friends and confidants known as the Memphis Mafia. That was not a casual gesture. Very few people were allowed into that space, into those long nights of joking around, music sessions, and private conversations where the public king of rock and roll stripped away the crown and just tried to be a man among friends. Letting her in meant something. It was a sign that this wasn't just a set romance. She had crossed the invisible line between co-star and trusted insider. And yet, if you stand at Elvis's tomb today, in that perfectly composed garden at Graceland, none of this exists. There is no trace in the marble of the woman who once felt that electric current with him. No hint of the wild laughter, the shared passions, or the private world they briefly built together. To the stone, to the official story carved in granite, it's as if this love never happened at all. And that quiet erasure is where the real unease begins. Back at Graceland, far away from the bright lights of Hollywood, there was someone else living inside this story, Priscilla. She wasn't just a casual girlfriend dropping by on weekends. She was the young woman who had been carefully brought into Elvis's world, moved into his home, and slowly groomed to become the future Mrs. Presley. Inside those walls, she was learning how to be the perfect partner for a man who belonged not only to her, but also to millions of fans in an unforgiving spotlight. Graceland was supposed to be their private sanctuary, the place where the public king could become simply Elvis with her. That's what makes the situation almost impossible to even imagine. On one side, you have the king of rock and roll, a global superstar whose every move was monitored, packaged, and sold to the public. His image had to be spotless, devoted, romantic, in control. On the other side, you have a secret relationship unfolding miles away on a movie set, a connection so powerful that it refused to stay within the boundaries of professional acting. And in the middle of it all, you have a woman sitting in the very house that symbolized his future, trying to trust him while the ground beneath her feet was quietly shifting. While Priscilla waited at Graceland, believing she was at the center of his life, Elvis and Ann-Margret were weaving a different kind of story, one written in secret meetings, whispered phone calls, and letters that were never meant for anyone else's eyes. He'd call her from the road, from hotel rooms, from places where his voice could be soft and unguarded in ways it rarely was at home. She'd write back, pouring feelings onto paper, sealing them in envelopes that carried far more weight than any script. Every time the phone rang at Graceland or the mail arrived, the tension between what Priscilla thought she knew and what was actually happening only grew. Priscilla would later describe, in her own memoir, the gnawing discomfort she felt about Elvis's co-star romances, the way little hints, rumors, and subtle changes in his behavior started to pile up. One moment that stands out is when she finally understood just how deep things had gone. A vase of flowers shattered in anger, a physical symbol of the emotional crack running through her world. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the realization that the man she was supposed to marry had divided his heart in a way that left her standing on the outside of something she couldn't fully see but could definitely feel. And all of this, the quiet heartbreak, the secret calls, the broken vase, the tension between what was shown and what was hidden, was unfolding inside the same Graceland that people now tiptoe through in reverent silence. The same house that sheltered this complicated, painful love story during Elvis's life would later present a beautifully sanitized version of him in death. The walls that once held whispers and arguments now guide tourists past polished displays and carefully worded plaques, giving no hint of the emotional chaos they once witnessed, or of the chapter that would eventually be wiped clean from the story told at his tomb. We've walked through the garden, we've gone back to Hollywood, we've stood inside Graceland's walls, so let me finally say this as clearly as I can. Here's my disturbing announcement about Elvis Presley's tomb. It's not just a grave, it is a carefully crafted lie of omission. The stone doesn't scream or shout, it doesn't accuse anyone, but in what it chooses not to say, it quietly rewrites the story of the man buried beneath it. When you read that marble, it tells you exactly who Elvis belonged to in a legal and family sense. You see the names that fit the official narrative, the relatives, the titles, the roles that are safe to celebrate in bronze and granite. Devoted son, father, icon. It's all true, but it's not complete. There is a difference between the life a man lived on paper and the inner life he carried in his heart. And that difference is where the silence on this stone becomes so unsettling. Because if you look around that tomb, you'll see family members resting close by. You'll see names fans instantly recognize. But you will not see a single trace of the woman who once described herself as his soulmate. The woman whose story is woven through some of the most intense years of his life. She is nowhere, not in the words, not in the layout, not in the way his story is framed for the millions who come to pay their respects. It's as if that entire chapter was picked up and quietly removed before the final draft was carved into stone. And that's why this isn't about ghosts or wild conspiracies. It's about something much more human and, in a way, more disturbing. When you stand at that tomb, you think you're seeing the full story of Elvis Presley, the beginning, the middle, and the end, all summed up in a few solemn lines. You're not. A huge piece of his heart is missing from the marble, and once you realize what's been left out, this peaceful garden stops feeling like the whole truth and starts feeling like a beautifully polished cover-up of a love the stone refuses to admit existed. Even after the affair ended and their lives moved in different directions, the bond between Elvis and Ann-Margret never really vanished. It just went underground, like a river running beneath the surface. Years later, when the news broke in 1977 that Elvis had died, she didn't rush to cameras or tabloids. Instead, she flew to Memphis quietly, not as a scandal from his past, but as someone who had once mattered to him in a way very few people did. She arrived at Graceland with her husband by her side, not to make a scene, but to say goodbye. There was no red carpet, no spotlight, just a woman walking into a house that still held the echoes of their shared memories. What happened next speaks louder than any rumor ever could. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, personally greeted Ann-Margret and escorted her inside. He didn't treat her like an embarrassment or an unwelcome reminder. He treated her like someone who had held an important place in his son's heart. That gesture, simple, dignified, and private, said everything. In that moment, it was clear that whatever had happened between Elvis and Ann-Margret wasn't just a wild fling cooked up for movie marketing. It was real enough and meaningful enough that even in death, his own father honored the connection by walking beside her. Years later, when Ann-Margret reflected on Elvis, she didn't use vague phrases or safe, distant language. She called him her soulmate. She said they were connected mind, body, and soul. Those aren't the kind of words you choose lightly, especially when you've built your own life, your own marriage, your own career. They're the words of someone who knows that what they shared was unique, intense, and impossible to fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. Her memories of him are warm, vivid, and deeply human. Laughter, vulnerability, wild joy, and quiet understanding all wrapped together. Now put that warmth next to the cold, silent stone of his tomb at Graceland, and the disconnect becomes hard to ignore. On one side, you have a woman describing a soul-deep connection that never fully faded. On the other, you have a grave that behaves as if she never existed at all. No mention, no hint, not even a symbolic gesture that acknowledges that part of his life. And that's where the real question starts to gnaw at you. If the person you felt most connected to in life isn't allowed to exist at your grave, what does that say about who controls your story? Who decides which loves get carved into marble and which ones get quietly erased, as if they were never part of the man the world came here to mourn? When a legend dies, their story doesn't just freeze in place, it gets managed. Families step in, estates step in, lawyers, managers, and even corporations step in. They decide what goes into documentaries, what's written on plaques, what fans are allowed to see on official tours. The people who love that person privately, the friends, the lovers, the ones who saw them at 3 a.m. in their weakest moments, don't usually get to write the final chapter. Their memories live in books, interviews, or quiet conversations, but not often in stone. Elvis is a perfect example of how that works. On paper, the path laid out for him looks clear and tidy. A wife, a daughter, a famous home, a grieving family. It's a narrative that fits nicely into a museum brochure. But the inner map of his heart was nowhere near that neat. It was tangled, emotional, full of contradictions and complicated connections that didn't always line up with the public image. He wasn't just the king. He was a man trying to balance duty, desire, expectation, and the kind of love that doesn't always fit neatly into a family tree. That's why leaving someone like Ann-Margret out of the official narrative at his tomb feels so unsettling. It doesn't just skip a name, it reshapes him into a softer, simpler, more comfortable version of himself. A version without the messy, inconvenient parts of his heart. It sends a quiet message that only certain kinds of love, formal, legal, easy to explain, are worthy of being remembered in marble. While the loves that were wild, complicated, or inconvenient are expected to fade into the background, no matter how real they were. And this isn't just about Elvis, it's about all of us. If someone were to edit your life for a plaque, one sentence, one stone, one official version, who would get erased from your story? The friend who saved you when you were at your lowest? The person you loved but never married? The relationship that didn't fit the image people had of you? As we stand here at this tomb, looking at what it chooses to remember and what it chooses to forget, that question lingers in the air. And it's one you might still be thinking about long after this video ends. So now picture yourself back in that meditation garden, standing a few feet from Elvis Presley's tomb. The flowers are still there, the fountain is still murmuring in the background, and the marble still looks calm, polished, complete. But you're different now. You know there are pieces of his life that never made it onto that stone. And when you look at it, you'll understand. The most important missing piece isn't a name etched in granite. It's a love story carved out of history, quietly kept just out of sight. That's the heart of what I've been trying to show you. Graceland's tomb doesn't just honor Elvis, it edits him. It presents a version of who he was that's safe, familiar, and easy to fit into a guided tour, while leaving whole chapters of his emotional life between the lines. Once you see that, this place doesn't just feel like a shrine anymore. It feels like a beautifully written story, with one very deliberate blank space right where things get the most human. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Ann-Margret should be openly acknowledged in the story Graceland tells about Elvis? Or should that chapter stay between the people who lived it and the fans who dig deep enough to find it? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Tell me if this changed the way you see that tomb. If you stayed with me to the end of this video, tap like so more people can find it, and subscribe for more hidden chapters behind famous graves, untold love stories, and the secrets carved just outside the edges of history.